Thank you very much, Mr. Clay. Mr. Braley?
Thank you. Specialist O'Neill, thank you for appearing today. In addition to being an eyewitness to Corporal Tillman's death and reporting this incident up the chain of command, you were also involved in writing a statement that was used to award Corporal Tillman the Silver Star. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And now we are aware of serious questions that have been raised as to whether someone tampered with your statement. Let me start by asking you whether you remember the point in time where you were asked to write down your recollections of that day.
I can't say I remember the exact point in time where I was informed that I would be writing up a witness statement towards what happened. I just remember having my platoon sergeant at the time tell me that I was going to be writing up a statement on what happened for an award for Pat.
But can you give us some general time frame and the sequence of events you've been discussing here today to give us some context into when that request was made by your platoon sergeant?
I would say a general time frame, probably the 26th or 27th of April. We didn't get back to Salerno for a few days after Pat was killed. So as soon as we got back to Salerno, that's when I was advised or asked to write the statement, sir.
And I've been involved in 23 years of being an attorney and having witnesses prepare statements. Was this a situation where they gave you a sheet of paper and told you to write down in your own words your best recollection of the events that had happened, or did someone prepare a statement for you to review and sign?
What happened, sir, was I got sat behind a computer and I was told to type up my recollection of what happened. And as soon as I was done typing, I was relieved to go back to my platoon, sir, and that was the last I heard of it.
So when you finished typing your statement, it was in a digital format that had not been printed out, is that correct?
Roger that, sir.
And so no one printed it out and asked you to review it and verify it and sign it at the time it was originally drafted by you?
No, sir.
So at any time, did you ever sign in your handwriting a statement that you had reviewed and verified the authenticity of?
Negative, sir.
I want to ask you about the statement that was Old Silver Star commendation. This version of the statement says the following, quote, Corporal Tillman moved us into a position where we would be safe from enemy rounds. To the best of your recollection, did you write this sentence?
That sentence sounds like something I would have wrote, sir.
And where were the enemy rounds?
We weren't taking direct enemy rounds, sir, at that time. But we moved into a position where if we would have been, we would have been safe, sir.
Did Corporal Tillman shield you from enemy rounds at any time?
Negative, sir.
This version of the statement also says you, quote, engaged the enemy very successfully, end quote. That the enemy moved most of their attention to your position, which, quote, drew a lot of fire from them. Did you write these sentences claiming that you were engaged with the enemy?
No, sir.
Do you know who made the changes to your statement to make it appear as if you were receiving fire from the enemy rather than from your own platoon?
No, sir.
Mr. Gimbel, the Inspector General's office investigated these alterations to the witnesses' statements and flagged these differences as well. But in the course of your investigation, did you ever discover who specifically changed this language and why that language was changed?
Let me just say this, is the citations that we got were part of the package that we got out of the General Jones investigation, and they were not signed. It just had stamped as original signed, and our investigators went back to Specialist O'Neill and the sergeant and said, did you write these? And they said no, that they did not, okay, that there was parts of it that was accurate, parts of it that were inaccurate. We were unable to determine who in the chain of command actually did the alterations of it, so concluded that when people approved those citations based on those statements, being the battalion, regimental, and joint task force commanders, that they were accountable for the misstatements and inaccuracies.
Well, I have been through my father's service records from when he served on Iwo Jima, and there are signatures on almost every documentation of anything he did during the entire time he was enlisted. Is it your understanding that this practice of taking unsigned statements in support of a commendation recommendation is standard operating procedure within the Army?
I would not believe it is, but I would only point out that Silver Star, there actually does not have to be valorous witness statements at the time this occurred. It can just be a citation.
Well, did you ever determine in the course of your investigation who, out of all the possible people who had contact with that statement, would have been the most likely person to have made alterations to the statement originally prepared by Specialist O'Neill?
Actually, no, we could not determine that. I could speculate, but I just prefer not to. It's somewhere in the approval chain that it got edited, and so we really can't pin a face to the actual who did the keyboard changes on it. So that left us the only action we had after that is when you sign up on something, like when I sign something in my office, I'm assuming responsibility for it, the accuracy. And I hold myself accountable. So when you have the signatures on those citations and recommendations, they become accountable for it.
As part of your investigation, did you ever bring in an IT specialist to look at the hard drive on that computer or any other computer that document had been placed upon to determine who had access to the computer and was responsible for the alteration?
We got this as a hard copy printout and a part of the investigative package from the General Jones investigation.
So did you ever determine the computers that it had been on and who had access?
No, we did not.
Do you think that would be a sensible follow-up part of an investigation, looking into who might have been responsible for altering a document of this magnitude?
It would be a good thing, but the issue would be that it was 2 years before in theater, and we were, I'm not sure we could ever track the computer down. It would be.
Well, we wouldn't know that unless we actually tried to track it down, would we?
We wouldn't.
Specialist O'Neill, I want to give you the opportunity to follow up on a response you were making in response to Mr. Waxman, and I think he had to cut you off to keep the hearing moving, but you were talking about after the shooting whether or not Corporal Tillman was dead immediately, and then you had to stop your narrative of that. Would you continue with your narrative of what you were saying at the time?
Yeah, that's not a problem, sir. I started off, at that time I was on the ground, and I noticed blood pooling up around me, and at that time I had thought that I was shot. So I started communicating with Pat, not realizing he had passed away, asking him if he had been okay, and I had no response, and the blood was, there was a lot of blood everywhere, and I was starting to get really worried. So when I could finally get my body to move, I stood up and turned around and looked at Pat, and he was slumped back on the ground, covered in blood, and I went up position, I grabbed him, and realized at that time that he had been shot in the head, and there wasn't much of him. After that, I kind of blinked out. The next thing I remember was Sergeant Ward, who was part of 3rd Squad, telling me to pick up my helmet, and I didn't even remember taking it off, putting me on security, getting me to move out of the ridge line that we were in, and I just have little chunks of my memory will come back and then will go away. Basically, that's the end of the night when I'm standing on the side of a building calling security, and the regimental Sergeant Major Birch, comes up to me and asks me if I'm all right. And after that, next thing I remember being inside a room pulling security on the local personnel and telling Specialist Ariel that Pat had been killed by friendly fire, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braley. Ms. McCollum?